I've always wondered about the word beef. We don't need it in the English language because we have the word cow. What did you have for dinner yesterday? Cow. So I looked it up, and it turns out that the reason we say cow in the English language has to do with a marriage that took place over 1,000 years ago. So with your kind permission, I'm going to tell you why we have this extra word in English. Now, to start with, we have to consider the cow. This is a cow. This is your typical Guernsey cow, named after the island of Guernsey, which is right here between England and France, with Denmark given for reference. Now, to begin with, I'm going to have to ask you to come back with me. Back into the past. Back to a simpler time. Back when the world was young. Back to a time you may have forgotten. Back to, the year 800 or so in England. At that time, the English language didn't have the word beef. It only had the word cow. It hardly seems like the English language. But then again, England hardly seemed like England. England was a collection of kingdoms like Northumbria and Mercia and East Anglia and Kent and Wessex. And the people of these kingdoms did what they did best, which is beating the hell out of one another. These people were in desperate need of a distraction. And they got it. They got it good. But probably not in the way they wanted it. They got it in the form of the Viking invasions. The Vikings, who came to England from Denmark, and they attacked and harried and inconvenienced the English, especially in this area up here, which was later to become the Kingdom of York, and you can see the effects on the harried and inconvenienced face of King Ethelwulf, shown here at the age of 26. Now, there were some leaders who were better than others at dealing with the Viking problem. For example, King Alfred the Great was pretty good at that, but as his name suggests, not everyone could be Alfred the Great. The English were not the only ones having difficulties. The French were having difficulties too, but they solved their problem in a slightly different way. They made a deal with the Vikings. A deal can be good because each side gets something, and here is King Charles the Simple making a deal with King Hrolvr, or Rollo, of the Vikings. The French had 3 demands. Number 1, stop killing us, which would seem to be reasonable. Number 2, start speaking French, a civilized language. And Charles's 3rd demand was, recognize my ultimate superiority, you Danish slime whom we are forced begrudgingly to respect. These demands were agreed to, and in return, the Vikings were given a parcel of land called the Northman Duchy, a duchy being a parcel of land controlled by a duke, and this Northman Duchy became known as Normandy, which is this area here, north of Paris, along the English Channel. Okay. Once upon a time, there was a king named Ethelred. Ethelred II. Here is Ethelred. He is known in history as Ethelred the Unready. His actual nickname, in Old English, was Ethelred Unred, which means Ethelred the Ill-Advised. But if you're ill-advised, usually it turns out that you're unready. So it's not a completely inaccurate nickname. He was married, his first wife died, and he took as his second wife a woman named Emma of Normandy. Here is the happy couple. And things were okay at the beginning of his reign on the divided island of Britain. But after a while, things began to change, and the Viking king in the northern part of England did some thinking and came to the conclusion that having 2 kings on the island was not as good as having 1 king on the island. And so he encouraged Ethelred, assisted by his army, of course, to leave the island, which he did, and he was forced into exile and had to stay with his in-laws in France, or in Normandy. He took with him his wife Emma, his young son Edward, and also his son by his first marriage, who would later be known as Edmund Ironside. So Edward pretty much grew up in Normandy, and unfortunately he grew up without a father because, in a very complicated series of events, Ethelred eventually returned to England and was able to make nice with the people who had thrown him out. Well, in 1042, the Danish king Hardeknuth, his half-brother, everything gets a little complicated, died and did not leave an heir, which left the throne of England open, and so Edward took this as his opportunity to take what was rightfully his and cross the Channel, and on the 3rd of April, 1043, was crowned King Edward, King of all the English. Now, Edward liked England, of course, but he also missed Normandy, and he missed his friends and his family, particularly his little cousin Billy, with whom he had played so often. And Billy would occasionally visit England and do the whole tourist thing. And as time went by, it occurred to Billy that Edward wasn't going to have any children. And he thought, wow, wouldn't it be a nifty idea if he, Billy, would be the heir presumptive, if he could be the next king of England? And Edward seemed to be down with that. However, time passed, Edward became older, and then on his deathbed, with his dying gasp, he held aloft his bony finger and pointed to his hand-picked successor, his brother-in-law Harold, who the next day was crowned King Harold, King of all the English. Now, as you can imagine, Billy, now William, the Duke of Normandy, was not terribly happy with this state of affairs. It wasn't a complete surprise to him. He had actually had conversations with Harold, in which Billy had said, by the way, if you are offered the crown, you are not to take it, and Harold seemed to understand the gravity of this situation. But when Edward died, it seemed all bets were off. So William did what people did in those days when they were upset and members of the nobility. He wrote a letter to the Pope, in which he said that he had been promised the throne of England and that he had been double-crossed. He also said that he might just have to go over to England and take what was rightfully his. The Pope responded with a resounding okie dokie, and William began to assemble an army and navy on the northern coast of France, and he invited people to help him in this mission, and promised them all kinds of royal titles if they would participate in the invasion of England. Now, if this weren't bad enough, the Danes, or Vikings, who had been out of the picture just for a little while, decided to give it one more try. So here is poor Harold in the middle. He's got Vikings coming in from the north and Normans coming in from the south, who are, of course, actually Vikings in disguise. Harold goes first to meet the Danes, because they've landed first, and, much to his surprise, he defeats them at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. He is overjoyed by this victory, but his joy is very short-lived, because about 30 seconds after the battle, he is informed that the Normans have landed in the south. He turns his army around, and they head south all the way until they hit a little town called Hastings. Well, the English and French meet on the battlefield, and they mix it up a little. And as time is going by, William notices that the English are doing pretty well. He's got this gigantic, well-organized army, but Harold's people have just fought a battle, and they know each other's moves. William calls for a temporary retreat of the Norman forces. They do retreat, and the English see this as their opportunity to cut down the French in their flight. But, as you can see, it's all been a ruse, because the Normans have retreated in perfect order, and all they have to do is turn around, and they catch the English completely by surprise. Now, if this weren't bad enough, in the middle of this battle, King Harold suffers what we would today call a medical condition. And this medical condition prevents Harold from giving further orders, or respirating. The English become even more disorganized, and the French hold the day. And though there are still some minor battles to be fought, on Christmas Day, 1066, William, the Duke of Normandy, is crowned King of England. He becomes King William the Conqueror. Amazingly enough, he maintains his loyalty to his liege lord, the King of France, and even more amazingly, keeps his promise to all of those people who helped him by making them earls and dukes and lords, and does this by systematically killing off the entire English nobility, replacing them with French people. The ruling class of England becomes French-speaking for the next 200 years, and the French word for cow meat is bœuf.